Hollywood spent decades selling an image of perfection. The woman had to look elegant, graceful, and just the right size beside the man. But what happened when she was taller than the leading man? Suddenly, the camera became the problem. Actors were placed on boxes. Women were told to remove their shoes. Some actresses bent their knees, slouched against doorways, or changed the way they walked simply to make a male co-star appear taller. And some of the most talented women in American entertainment were punished for something they could never change: their height. They were called Amazonian, intimidating, even freakish. Yet many became stars anyway. Today, we're looking at 10 remarkable women whose careers reveal just how far Hollywood went to make a tall woman disappear inside the frame. And the final story may be the clearest example of all. Number 1. Ingrid Bergman. When Ingrid Bergman arrived in Hollywood in 1939, the studio system immediately began measuring her, not simply for costumes or camera angles, but to determine whether she could be reshaped into what Hollywood wanted. David O. Selznick reportedly had concerns. Her name sounded too foreign. Her eyebrows were considered too heavy. And then there was her height. Bergman stood around 5'9" 1/2 inch, noticeably taller than many of the leading men she would eventually appear beside. But instead of changing herself, she refused to play along. That decision became one of the most important choices of her career. Her Hollywood breakthrough came with Intermezzo. Then came Casablanca, followed by Gaslight, Notorious, Anastasia, and eventually Murder on the Orient Express. She became one of the most respected actresses of her generation, winning 3 Academy Awards. But behind those famous romantic scenes, the height problem never completely disappeared. Humphrey Bogart was shorter. So were Charles Boyer and Claude Rains. Adjustments were constantly made. Bergman removed her shoes. Men were given lifts or placed on platforms. On Casablanca, even the composition of famous scenes had to account for the difference. Think about that for a moment. One of the most recognizable romantic images in cinema history depended partly on hiding the fact that the woman was taller. Bergman continued working even after being diagnosed with breast cancer. Her final screen performance came in Golda in 1982, despite the disease having spread extensively. She died in London on her 67th birthday. For decades, Hollywood treated her height like a technical inconvenience. But she never allowed it to become a limitation on her talent. And if Bergman proved that a tall woman could become a legendary leading lady, another actress discovered that television had its own strange way of solving the same problem. Number 2. Barbara Feldon. How do you hide the height of a woman who appears on television every single week? In the case of Barbara Feldon, the answer was surprisingly simple: never let her stand normally. Born Barbara Ann Hall in Pennsylvania in 1933, Feldon studied drama and eventually made her way into television. She was also an intelligent and accomplished woman outside acting. As a young woman, she had dreamed of becoming a dancer, but height had already become an obstacle. She eventually reached roughly 5'8" 1/2 inch to 5 feet 9 inches. Then came Get Smart. Feldon played Agent 99 opposite Don Adams as Maxwell Smart. The show became a major television success, running for 5 years and earning Feldon Emmy nominations. But the visual joke was often happening without the audience being told. Feldon was taller than Adams, so she leaned against door frames. She sat when she had no reason to sit. She slouched. She appeared barefoot or in stockings in certain scenes. Meanwhile, Adams could be given a small platform or other camera adjustments. The result was strange. Agent 99 was supposed to be the capable one. She was frequently smarter than Maxwell, more competent, and better prepared. The audience understood that, but the production still seemed uncomfortable allowing her to physically dominate the frame. The woman could be smarter than the man. Apparently, she just couldn't be taller. Feldon later joked about the physical tricks required to make the show work, but underneath the humor was a very real Hollywood rule. Women could be powerful, but only within carefully controlled visual boundaries. And decades before Feldon, another actress faced that same problem on a much larger scale. Only she eventually turned the supposed disadvantage into the foundation of her entire career. Number 3. Bea Arthur. Long before Bea Arthur became one of television's most commanding personalities, she wished she were smaller. As a child, she admired actresses who represented a very different kind of femininity: small, blonde, delicate, and traditionally glamorous. But B. Arthur grew tall. By the age of 12, Bernice Frankel had reached approximately 5 feet 9 inches, and she eventually stopped growing. At school, her height often determined the parts she received. She was given male roles because she was simply the tallest person available. Instead of letting that destroy her confidence, she developed something else: a sharp sense of humor. Her classmates even voted her the wittiest girl in her class. Arthur later served in the Marine Corps during World War II and studied acting in New York. Her stage career grew throughout the 1950s and 1960s, eventually leading to a Tony Award for Mame in 1966. Then television found her. At an age when many actresses were already being pushed aside, Arthur appeared on All in the Family as Maud's character, and eventually received her own series. Maud allowed her to do something television rarely permitted a woman to do. She could dominate the room. She could fill a doorway. She could tower over men. She could pause before delivering a line and allow the physical presence to become part of the comedy. Arthur once pointed out the obvious problem. Traditional Hollywood simply hadn't created many leading roles for women with her combination of height and voice. So she didn't wait for Hollywood to create one. She created her own space. By the time she died in 2009 at the age of 86, B. Arthur had become proof that the physical traits once considered career problems could become a performer's greatest strengths. But if Arthur eventually turned height into power, another woman discovered that the fashion world could celebrate the exact same thing Hollywood struggled to accept. Number 4. Susie Parker. At 14, Susie Parker was taken to Eileen Ford's modeling agency by her older sister, Dorian Lee, who was already successful in fashion. Ford looked at the teenager and reportedly thought she was too tall. Parker was about 5 feet 9 inches. In another industry, that might have been the end. Instead, another person recognized what everyone else had missed. Diana Vreeland began booking her. Within years, Parker became one of the highest-paid models in the world. She reportedly earned around $200 an hour and approximately $100,000 annually at her peak. She appeared on more than 60 magazine covers and became something unusual for a model of her era, a recognizable public personality. Fashion had stopped treating her height as a defect. Hollywood had not. When Parker moved into films, the results were inconsistent. Her appearance and funny face gave her only a small amount of screen time, despite the character being inspired partly by the world Parker herself had inhabited. She appeared opposite Cary Grant in Kiss Them For Me. Later came 10 North Frederick, The Best of Everything, and The Interns. But the movie industry never seemed to know what to do with the woman who had been one of fashion's most recognizable faces. The irony was enormous. Fashion had helped create a new image of the modern woman using Parker's face and body. Hollywood looked at that same woman and struggled to find a story for her. Eventually, Parker married actor Bradford Dillman and stepped away from the business. She died in 2003 at 69. Her career exposed a strange contradiction. The very industry that had once rejected her proportions helped make her one of the most photographed women of her generation. And somewhere between fashion and Hollywood stood another actress whose height became so famous that the public was barely told the truth about it. Number 5. Lynda Carter. When the myth became taller than the woman. For years, newspapers and magazines described Lynda Carter as 6 feet tall. She wasn't. By her own measurement, she stood about 5 foot 8 3/4 inch. So why did the extra inches appear in the public story? Because Hollywood and the press had already decided that the woman playing Wonder Woman needed to seem larger than life. Carter grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, tall and slender, and she wasn't always comfortable with that image. She toured with bands and eventually entered a beauty pageant almost casually. In 1972, she won Miss World USA. She had already heard the familiar warnings. Tall women had difficulty succeeding in entertainment. She was described as an Amazon. Then, in 1975, that word changed meaning. She became Wonder Woman. The television series ran for 4 years and turned Carter into an international star. She performed much of her own physical work and trained with stunt professionals. She even became an honorary member of the Stunt Women's Association. But there was another problem beyond height. The character was becoming too powerful in more ways than one. Early scripts reportedly gave Wonder Woman stronger themes about women's independence and sisterhood. Executives worried about how far those ideas should go, and some of that material was toned down. So Carter faced 2 forms of Hollywood adjustment. Her body was exaggerated into a myth. Her voice was reduced to fit the era. The public was told she was almost 6 feet tall because the legend required it. And the woman behind the costume was expected to fit inside an image that had already become larger than reality. But she wasn't the first tall woman to discover that Hollywood preferred turning unusual physical traits into a gimmick. One actress was literally transformed into a machine. Number 6. Julie Newmar. The actress Hollywood turned into a robot. Julie Newmar had already proven that she could be funny long before Hollywood decided what it wanted her body to represent. Born in Los Angeles in 1933, she trained as a dancer and worked with the Los Angeles Opera before making her way toward Broadway. She eventually won a Tony Award for comedy in The Merry-Go-Round in 1959. That should have established her as a serious comic performer. Instead, Hollywood often noticed something else first. Newmar stood roughly 5 feet 11 inches. Her height and striking appearance made her seem larger than the conventional screen image of a woman. So the roles began arriving with a pattern. Seductress, warrior, machine. In My Living Doll, she played an android. It was almost absurdly literal. If Hollywood couldn't figure out how to write a tall woman as an ordinary person, it could always turn her into something extraordinary. Then came Batman in 1966. Newmar played Catwoman across 12 episodes, and the role permanently connected her name with the character. But she understood the danger of allowing one role to consume an entire career. She took advantage of the opportunity the character gave her while refusing to let it become the only thing people remembered. And yet the contradiction remained. She had won a Tony for comedy. Hollywood mostly wanted her because she looked extraordinary. Newmar has continued to emphasize the comic side of her career because that was the part of herself the industry often overlooked. The same pattern happened to another tall woman whose physical size was even more difficult to ignore. Number 7. Hope Emerson. Hope Emerson was approximately 6 feet 2 inches and weighed around 230 pounds. Those numbers practically dictated what Hollywood decided she should play. But before movies turned her into a terrifying figure, Emerson had spent decades proving that she was a performer first. Born in Iowa in 1897, she entered entertainment young. She worked in vaudeville and cabaret, singing, playing piano, performing comedy, and even doing strongwoman acts. For roughly 20 years, she was primarily known as a comic performer. Then came movies. Her film debut arrived in Cry of the City in 1948. George Cukor used her in Adam's Rib the following year, where she played a strongwoman capable of lifting Spencer Tracy. Then came Caged in 1950. Emerson played Evelyn Harper, a brutal prison matron. The role earned her an Academy Award nomination and became the template for the intimidating female prison guard character that countless movies would imitate. Suddenly, Hollywood had discovered exactly how it wanted to use her. She was no longer the comedian who could sing and entertain. She was the giant, the jailer, the woman who frightened people. Emerson openly recognized the trap. After spending 2 decades performing comedy, she found herself repeatedly cast in violent or threatening roles. Yet away from the screen, her life was very different. She cared for her mother for years and never married. She also lent her voice to television advertising as Elsie the Cow. She remained funny despite the industry's insistence that she be frightening. Emerson died in 1960 at 62 from a liver ailment. Her story may be one of the clearest examples of Hollywood reducing an entire performer to one physical characteristic. But another actress discovered an even more painful version of the same problem, being told by respected theater professionals that her height had already destroyed her chances of becoming a leading lady. Number 8. Vanessa Redgrave. Vanessa Redgrave grew up inside one of Britain's most famous acting families. Born in London in 1937, she studied at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama and had serious ambitions for the stage. But when she grew to around 5 feet 11 inches, people around her began predicting limitations. One respected figure in British theater, John Gielgud, reportedly considered her too tall for conventional leading roles because male actors would struggle to appear taller beside her. Redgrave herself later remembered hearing similar doubts. The message was simple. You can act, but perhaps you cannot be the woman at the center of the story. She chose not to accept that conclusion. Her breakthrough came through Shakespeare, particularly her work with the Royal Shakespeare Company. Instead of forcing herself into the traditional Hollywood image, she built a career around roles with enough authority to accommodate her presence. Then came films including Morgan, Blow Up, Camelot, Isadora, and Julia. For Julia, she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. She eventually collected 6 Oscar nominations, a Tony Award, Emmy Awards, major international honors, and a BAFTA Fellowship. And the height problem? It never completely vanished. Actors were sometimes given lifts. Redgrave wore softer or flatter footwear. Camera positions were adjusted. But the difference was that her performances became too important to dismiss. Hollywood had warned her that her body might prevent her from becoming a leading woman. Instead, she became a performer whose reputation eventually mattered more than the measurements. And that same battle was happening in American film with an actress who found herself changing the way she walked just to make her co-stars appear taller. Number 9. Alexis Smith, when the leading man needed a box. Alexis Smith understood the rules almost immediately. Whenever reporters asked about her height, she would say she was around 5 feet 9 inches, then joke that the real answer depended on the leading man. The joke was funny because it was true. Warner Brothers signed Smith after seeing her in a college production in 1941. Almost immediately, she was placed beside some of the biggest male stars in Hollywood. Errol Flynn, Clark Gable, Humphrey Bogart, William Holden, Bing Crosby. The studio even gave her the nickname, the Dynamite Girl, a label she reportedly disliked. What she disliked even more was being described as statuesque, because those words made her sound less like an actress and more like a physical object. The technical tricks were familiar. When she walked toward the camera, she sometimes altered her posture. She would slump or shift her body so her full height wouldn't dominate the image. For romantic scenes, she could remove her shoes. And if that wasn't enough, the man could simply be placed on a box. Smith eventually became frustrated with the kinds of parts she was being offered. When she rejected roles, the studio placed her on suspension. Eventually, Warner Brothers let her go. But decades later, she had something Hollywood couldn't adjust with a camera trick. In 1971, Smith appeared on Broadway in Follies. She performed in heels, at full height, and she won a Tony Award. Nobody needed to stand on a box beside her. Nobody needed to hide anything. She had finally reached a stage where her height was simply part of who she was. But another actress had an even more brutal experience, being one of the highest-paid women in Hollywood while simultaneously watching the studio destroy her career. Number 10. Kay Francis, the star Hollywood paid to disappear. In the 1930s, Kay Francis was enormous. Not physically enormous, but commercially. She was one of the highest-paid actresses in the United States, appearing on dozens of magazine covers and starring in a remarkable number of films. Born Catherine Edwina Gibbs in Oklahoma City in 1905, Francis eventually became one of the tallest leading women in Hollywood, standing around 5 feet 9 inches. She made dozens of pictures during the early years of her career. Trouble in Paradise, One Way Passage, Mandalay, I Found Stella Parrish. At her peak, she was a major star. But then the studio system began narrowing the possibilities. Her films became less ambitious. Her costumes and sets sometimes received more attention than the stories themselves. The roles increasingly repeated the same pattern, a glamorous woman suffering through another melodrama. Francis fought against the system. She threatened legal action and demanded either better material or freedom from her contract. The studio refused. Instead, she remained under contract, collecting her salary while being placed in increasingly cheap productions. Her diaries later revealed just how deeply the situation affected her. She understood that the studio could continue paying her while simultaneously making her irrelevant. Her private life was also marked by pain. She suffered severe burns in 1948. Later, breast cancer was diagnosed, and by the time doctors discovered it, the disease had spread. She died in New York in 1968 at 63. Her disappearance from popular memory became almost complete. That makes her story especially haunting. At one point, she had been one of the biggest female stars in America. Then Hollywood slowly stopped giving audiences reasons to remember her. And another woman would experience a different kind of disappearance, not because she lacked fame, but because Hollywood never found enough roles for someone who stood 6 feet 2.